So it's late February now, and the potatoes I've gotten from home are getting to the edge of what their really useful life. You can see some of them have gotten kind of squishy. These are still generally good inside. They're just not that good. So, if to use them up quickly, what I'm doing is chopping them up into relatively small pieces, and then pressure cooking them, or steaming them really, is realistically what it is. I use a pressure cooker because it makes it quicker, but it doesn't have to be a pressure cooker. You could just steam them other ways. And then I'll use them in various meals. And I'm trying to use these up relatively fast, so that's why I'm not just like using these as the microwave baked potatoes as I've shown before. Instead, I'm cutting up a pressure cooker because this makes them like get through them pretty fast. So what I did is I just snapped the ends off them, gave them a quick rinse, and now I'm cutting them up. And I would say in general they're pretty good. I had one really rotten one when I made this before, but mostly they're good. And for cooking them in the pressure cooker while steaming, what I do is I bring them up to like the full like pressure of the pressure cooker, and then let them sit for 3 minutes in there. And at that time, they still have some structure to them. They aren't like completely mush. If I was making mashed potatoes, I'd probably leave them in there for 5 minutes. And then I just let it cool down from there naturally. I don't like turn it off faster. And somewhat is that these cooking times are for assuming that natural cool down afterwards. And it is also really important to have like a clock with a second hand. Most of my cooking, it's plus or minus a minute or two, it's fine. But with this, because it's such a short time, it does really matter to have like to the second the amount of timing. And then I'll take them out and put them in the fridge because I'm not eating these all in one meal. And then I can make a variety of meals with it. Now that it is cooled down enough to depressurize, time to move them into another bucket. And I'm not quite sure what the best tool to move them in is, because this can kind of cut some of them in half, but works generally pretty well compared to any other tool. You could do it with a fork, but that's individually, and that takes way too long. And I should note that the cooking takes a lot less time than either beans or rice, because there's initially you might think, oh yeah, it's 3 minutes. This is 3 minutes, whereas beans is like 20 minutes and rice is 10 minutes. But it's also that this has a lot less mass than those, and so it takes quicker to heat up and cool down to the full temperature. And this might be slightly overcooked for what I want, but generally pretty good. And you can also, as you saw, load it up super high because it isn't like water up there. It's just the steam, and it doesn't like boil up like beans or rice does. One of the things I like making with the potatoes is a potato omelet. Some onions go well with it too. I like to fry these up for a couple minutes until they just start to go translucent. And adding a good bunch of grease in, even in a non-stick pan, really helps us go better. And partly this isn't a particularly spectacular specimen of a non-stick pan. It's fairly well used. But it also gives a nice browning effect to most of this. And you could make this in a cast iron pan, but I find that this smaller size, if you're trying to cook up an omelet, you can actually get the full omelet in there better than the cast iron size pan I have. I've got a smaller cast iron pan at home that is perfect size for an omelet. This is even slightly too big. And one of the really important things when you're choosing a pan to make an omelet in is to have a lid available for that pan that fits that size. A minute or so later and it's ready to add potatoes, and an important thing to do is to turn it down a bit because, or at least for me, I cook onions on a pretty high heat, whereas potatoes work at a slightly lower heat better. This still isn't as low as what I'd cook eggs on. This takes a while because you definitely want the potatoes fully warmed up, and then get them a little bit brown can be quite nice. Now that the potatoes are looking a bit crispy, I like to add the pepper now, and if you want to add salt to it, I'm not the kind of person who particularly finds salt that appealing of a flavor in this sort of thing. This would be the time to add it, and then give it one last stir. And I have already turned this down to quite a low level a minute or so ago, because this is an electric stove. It takes some time to cool down. And then it's also pretty important to scrape all the stuff off, because that will just grab onto the eggs that you put in right after this. So, in with some pre-scrambled eggs. You can massage this a little bit till it gets fairly flat and all in the eggs. May be better to have that more flattened out before you start, but then on with the top. And it'll be quite a while. You want it mostly solid on the top before you flip it. And what this top does is it traps the heat, so the top of the omelet cooks better than just in the open pan where it really doesn't cook at all, because all the heat has to come up through the omelet, whereas here it's trapped and kind of cooks that, which is important because otherwise you have to cook at extremely low heat or the underside gets burned. I'm estimating it's about the right time for flipping it, and flipping is not something I'm particularly good at. Generally I end up flipping it in two pieces. Trick is to turn it around so you can get it back in the same spot, like the same half circle. Or I guess in this piece I'll be flipping in three pieces. And this is fine. This doesn't really matter unless you're going for presentation, which is not something I'm particularly concerned about when cooking for myself. Another couple minutes, I generally leave the top on. It isn't as necessary, but I just think it helps it cook better. And you could turn it up maybe a little bit, because the purpose of this is just to cook that last little bit, but I generally keep it still on low. And one thing I'll sometimes do is, instead of spending all this time waiting for the omelet to cook, and it does take quite a bit of time, is just do kind of an egg scramble, as I've shown before with the vegetable egg scramble. Do the same thing with the potatoes, and it still tastes really good. It lacks some of the structure, which is one aspect of this, but it's still a good meal. Another couple minutes and I'm going to put on some cheese. I happen to like cheese on my omelets, or anything egg, and I'm going to leave the top off and let it sit for another minute or so of cooking. I don't like the cheese super melty, so I'll take it off when the cheese is just starting to melt. So now, eating this meal with some squash and carrots on the side is a really nice texture, because you've got the eggs binding the potatoes together, which are kind of nice and chewy, but definitely not overly chewy. They just have a very nice, they don't just fall apart in your mouth, which I don't like. And it's just I happen to really enjoy it. And I have ketchup on here, You can put on salsa. In the summer I'll put on fresh tomatoes. It just happens to be that I don't have that much salsa and I have a lot of ketchup that should get used up eventually sometime.